philosophy, what is it really? Here's the thing. If I said to you that I believe, and I think I can justify it, that the great professional experts in the business establishments like Oxford, Cambridge or Harvard, I call them business establishments because it's all about money. They all have packaged the truths. They're not really interested in modifying it because it's a lot cheaper to sell the same thing over and over again. These people and all of the other establishments that then copy these elite ones don't understand what that word philosophy actually means. Now, I don't blame you if you think I'm being arrogant, but please bear with me and I will show you some evidence that hopefully will convince you that I may have a point. Now, we shouldn't be intimidated by experts. If you know, I'm now an old man, and in my life, in my experience, I have come to the conclusion that there really is no such thing as an expert. We just monkeys that climbed down from the trees only seconds ago. So to believe that we know everything, understand everything, is a nonsense. In any case, what I genuinely believe when I was, doing my work is that we are all trying to understand the universe and trying to understand natural algorithms, the ones that actually bother. But not all of us are paid. So the difference between an expert and a non-expert is not that they haven't done the work, it's because one gets paid and the other one doesn't. This word has always been interpreted to mean the love of wisdom or the love of truth. I don't believe wisdom or truth mean anything. These are just words. In fact, they're not words, they're concepts that need to be explained, because if you don't explain them, the truth, for example, the truth becomes this mystical thing. It's, that, for example, cultists use it, the truth, that you can sit under a tree and the truth will be given to you somehow. Or wisdom, is Aztec wisdom the same as Christian wisdom? Is it the same as Hellenic wisdom? Is it the same as scientific wisdom? If you don't explain exactly what you mean, you can then be forgiven in confusing these terms and mixing everything together and then confusing yourself, indefinitely. So if we leave it at that, it doesn't really mean much, does it? So alienation, I'll just recap a bit before. If you've been watching the previous videos on cosmonomy and then bionomy, the path of evolution, you'll have noticed that I keep talking about alienation. And alienation occurs through speciation, or through the tiny perpetual change in mutations. Everything changes. Stagnation is an illusion, because even if you genuinely have an event that has not changed, since everything around it has changed, then it has changed, because it is no longer the same event, because everything has to slot in within all of the other three-dimensional events. So there is no such thing as stagnation. Everything changes. Consciously, if we don't want things to change, then we constantly have to adapt it, then we constantly have to talk about it, otherwise it will change. And in my opinion, philosophy got alienated almost immediately after it was formalized, and in my opinion reached its perfect form. And that's with Socrates, because Plato almost immediately, his first student, alienated, and then Aristotle alienated even further. That's something for you to decide, have a look, when you get a chance. But anyway, unchecked mutations lead to alienation, and what you then have is, when you think you're actually talking about a bird, which is a dove, eventually you're actually talking about a hawk, which is a totally different being, and has alienated so much that it no longer fulfills the same purpose. So that's what I believe has happened to philosophy. These things I've just put down here are not the same, obviously. We need to fix what we mean by this thing, the original version, the perfect version that I would consider to be the starting point of how we would define philosophy and what is its best example. And that would be, for me, Socrates in 5th century BC Athens. And if you can see, we will define the dove as Socrates, and then we'll see how it has changed and what it really means. So we will fix that point in history, in the 5th century BC, but a lot of it has changed to this point here, which I believe we're here now. Philosophy has become not a living thing. It doesn't live in our lives. It started off as being an essential tool for living, but now it's just become an ornament. It's for people who think they're really, really smart, talking about abstract crap all day long. It has no social value. This guy here died for his political system and what he advocated, and I'll show you later on what I mean by Socrates not being really a philosopher, but he was a statesman, he was a politician, to a place where these philosophers just basically involved in intellectual masturbation, just sitting around talking nonsense about abstract subject no one cares about, and definitely has no social value. More importantly, if you paint this thing red, you can call it Aztec philosophy. You paint it green, that becomes Christian philosophy. You paint it again, Islamic philosophy, Hindu philosophy, etc. And in there, we also have a black one, which you can call Hellenic philosophy. Now, the point of this is that it becomes a crime, if you like, against the intellectual pursuit, because we are then saying that they are all the same, and they are absolutely not the same. They are totally different things, and they should not be called by that term. So, if we start here, this is what I said, we start with him as the perfect example of what philosophy should be. And you will see that all of these other people in the science and philosophy, when they are the rational contemplation of reality, are children of Socrates. All of them. In fact, this guy here said that Plato is my friend, but truth is my greater friend. So he knew, all of them knew somehow, had read Socrates. He had a big problem with Socrates, Nietzsche, but ultimately, without him knowing it, they're both talking exactly about the same thing, except that Nietzsche is just a teenage version of Socrates. That's again something separate. You may have already seen what I mean if you followed the videos on bionomy, the evolution, because both of these guys are talking about the evolution. He's talking about the mechanism of evolution, where he's talking about the motive of evolution. Anyway, so what we're really talking about when we talk about philosophy, we should separate substance from ceremony, substance from a title, because they're not the same thing, and ceremony means nothing unless it's an essential component of the substance. For example, a surgeon has to wear a certain clothes and go through a certain ceremony, because everything he does is essential to the well-being of his patient and to his work, which is the substance is surgery. But a priest wearing all his clothes and doing all the stuff that he does, is that really the same thing? Could he put a t-shirt on and do his clothes instead of putting on his robes and achieve the same thing? Probably. I'm not talking about religion. I don't mean to demean it in any way. My point here is not to say one is right and one is wrong. I'm just to say they are different. And once you've perceived the difference, then you can make up your own mind as to what is right and what is wrong for you. So if we take this is a Haynes workshop manual. When I was younger, I used to have a lot of these, and I used to mess about with cars and everything, and I found them quite useful. But the Haynes manual, or the manual for the repair of your car, whatever that may be, that is provided by Socrates and then obviously his child Darwin, is a totally different thing to, say, for example, a repair manual, which is what they also provide, because all religions are essentially political. They are there to influence human behavior in a given state or given society. So they are both basically trying to do the same thing, and I'm using the car analogy here to make my point so that you see clearly what I mean. What would they have to say about a car? They knew nothing about it. God Ra decided to create a car, and then Anubis decided to change its engine, and you should do this and that and obey him or obey that, and your car will be perfectly fine. What would the Christians have to say about a car? I mean, there's no the blueprint of a Ford Mondeo with the Dead Sea Scrolls, for example. What would the Aztecs have to say about a car? That the god whatever Palenque pierced his penis with a barb from a fish, and out of the blood came a car. My point is, I'm not saying that any of these are wrong. That's for you to decide, but they are not the same. You cannot call all of these workshop manuals to be the same. If you have a car and you want to repair it, where would you go? You would not go to buy an Aztec or an Egyptian repair manual. You would buy the one that gives you the chance to repair it with full pictures of how to, for example, change the drum brakes on your car. There's the slave cylinder, there's the pads, etc. How do you take them off? How do you put them back in? And how to do it, rather than saying, we'll keep praying or make a sacrifice somewhere and the brakes will mend themselves. You see my point? It's a totally different thing. So when we are talking about Hellenic philosophy, then you have to be very, very careful that you understand what that is. That is the rational contemplation of real algorithms in the real world. They are not subject to hearsay. They are perfectly demonstrable, and you can repeat them yourself, rather than believing that a guy saw something thousands of years ago that nobody can repeat anymore. Things like that. So the point about him is, as you'll see later when we talk about the Socratic philosophy and so on, is that he doesn't tell you what right and wrong is. He just simply shows you how to think about it. In other words, he doesn't repair the brakes for you. He just shows you how to repair your own brakes, and that is the difference. So it's your life as far as he is concerned. You keep it in good repair. That's the point of Hellenic philosophy. It started off, and I want you to please pay attention, because if you think I have a point, then don't lose this. This is what the purpose of philosophy is. As far as the guy who invented it, or the best example of philosophy, it was a tool, a life tool for every individual human to use it to repair and to safeguard their lives. As he said himself, a human life is not a human life if you don't examine your beliefs. That is what it means. So as far as he's concerned, philosophy is a very specific thing, and it's the rational contemplation of reality. So he's talking really about eunomia, discussed later on in the next video. I think you'll see exactly what I mean and where it comes from. So he is very much interested in eunomia. Eunomia begins with Solon a couple of hundred years before Socrates, but then he is the one that comes up with the perfect universal criteria for how to look for eunomia. So the rational contemplation of natural algorithms. As far as these other people are concerned, they are basically saying that there is the Egyptian garage. Leave it all to us, just give us the money and we will sort it out. The church is where you go and they will tell you what to do. Basically, you give them your money, and they will look after your life for you. The Aztecs were exactly the same. Religions are not the same as philosophy. They are totally different things. Religions are based on hearsay. Now, when I say hearsay, I mean no disrespect, but the point about it is no one in today's society has ever heard God speak to them directly. They keep saying that they heard it from a guy who 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 had written this book, and that book was written by human hands. Now, of course, the belief is that God dictated those to his prophets. If that's what happened, then that's what happened. But still, God himself did not write it. There was no tablets of stone. The only time God ever writes with his own finger was the tablets of stone, which, by the way, are lost now. Every other writing about any God, wherever he is, whether it's Christian or Jewish God, was done by human hands. So it's hearsay. Now, that doesn't mean that hearsay is wrong, but my point here is this is totally different thing. Hellenic philosophy is totally different to these religions. So Hellenic philosophy is a very specific thing. There is no such thing. Please, pay attention, because this, I think, is important, because even these experts in Oxford and Cambridge are making this confusion. I don't know why, because I consider that to be a crime against the human intellect. There is no such thing as Christian philosophy. There is Christian religion, there's the Christian doctrine, but there is no Christian philosophy. Why would you call it philosophy? Because if you're talking, for example, about creation, the idea of creation by the 7-day business in the Bible is not the same as Darwin, is it? I mean, it's a totally different thing. So that's a Socratic philosophy gives rise to Darwinian evolution. Christian theology, if you like, call it whatever you want. If you want to call it, philosophy, then don't call science philosophy anymore. Call it something else. But you have to make this distinction because it's important. There is no such thing as Aztec philosophy. There is no such thing as Islamic philosophy. Islam is a religion. Islam depends entirely on obedience to God and to Muhammad, the word of God. Whether it is Hellenic philosophy believes in no obedience to anything. Obedience to your own rational mind is the only thing that you have to obey. Everybody else is just a noise, is source of information. So to compare them is to insult them because they are not the same thing. That's my point. Now, to give you an example, if this guy is Dr. Abdul, and he's been, he's a trained doctor, a medical doctor, and he has experience in surgery and so on, and this is Dr. Mbembe, then these two are not the same. Why would he call himself Dr. Mbembe? I suppose he called doctor. I mean, a lot of juju doctors, if you watch videos and everything, they call themselves, and a lot of other confused people, because they think all of this is the same, they choose to go to these doctors, who basically are self-proclaimed. And because of this confusion, they believe that these two are the same. Now, to any reasonable mind, that is not the case. 99% of the human population that are not desperate. For example, there are certain terminal illnesses. I know of people, personally, that were so desperate when they couldn't get the right answers from these guys, because if you have terminal cancer, for example, there is not much they can do for you, that they would resort to going to these, and that's a sign of desperation, and sometimes hopefully it works and sometimes it doesn't, but that's a different matter. The point is that 99% of the rational population of the world now, regardless of where they live, understand that if you have a problem with your child or with yourself, you go here, you don't go there. Anyway, so why the confusion? Why are we making this confusion? Well, as I said, I can understand average people making this confusion, but for the establishment itself to screw it up so badly is unforgivable, because if this is a professor of chemistry, this is a different animal to the professor of theology. Now, you have to see it. I'm not saying he's any worse or he's not worth enough, but they are different. This is my point. Why do you want to call these professors? For example, you have a giraffe and you have a lion. Why would you call them giraffes or lions? They're not. They're completely different things. So this guy's method, you can repeat. Whatever he says, you can do yourself. This guy's methods cannot be repeated because he heard it from someone else. He said that Jonah was swallowed by and lived in the belly of the fish for so many days, or burning bushes spoke. None of those can be repeated, but you believe them because you want to believe them, because you're obedient to his word. Here, there is no obedience. He just tells you what it is, you can repeat it yourself. The two are not the same. So what about this, for example? Professor of Egyptology, is that a term that is reasonable? Because he is really talking about this business here, about the religion of thousands of years ago, and all of these ceremonies that they had, because what was the substance? I can't really work that out. You can work that out for yourself. Did the ceremonies mean anything? Did they achieve anything, or were they just basically a cry for help? Now, but because he is dealing with facts, he's dealing with the truths of the past, even though he's studying something that may not have been real, the actual culture was real. So he's looking at the Egyptian culture, and yes, he is a professor in the Hellenic sense of the word, in the Socratic sense of the word, because he applies rational observations of the evidence and then draws conclusions. Like, for example, the deciphering of the hieroglyphs was not done through religious ceremonies where people en masse got on their knees and prayed so that a voice could come from the skies and tell us what these things meant. They sat down and systematically worked it out in the Hellenic context of mathematics and rationality so that we could then understand what that is. So history of human evolution and thoughts, yes, that's a perfectly legitimate way of saying he is a professor of Egyptology. Anyway, if you look all around yourself, anything that you use, anything that you consider to be technology or even good, because I mean modern medicine you have to consider to be good, modern surgery, modern communication, modern technology as a whole. I mean, in some ways it's destructive, because it's not so much that the technology is bad, it's that we are too stupid. The technology is way too advanced for us, and we seek only one side, which is acceleration rather than any control. So that is a separate matter. But whatever you look at, that you use, microwave ovens, fridges, etc., as well as all of these, where do they come from? They do not come from Aztec philosophy, which doesn't, by the way, exist, or Aztec religion. There is no contribution to any of these from the Egyptian religion, or Hindu, or Christian, or Islamic. Now, all of these come from science and from true philosophy, which is the Hellenic descendants of Socrates. What's the point? I mean, why am I even saying this? Because in my opinion, bastardization of concepts create major problems, because we confuse ourselves. That's the first thing, especially in the modern world, where now we live in a place where everybody thinks there are alternative truths. I mean, that is the most insane thing. It's like being bitten by a black mamba, and everybody says, well, there are different ways of dealing with it. You can make yourself a cup of coffee, or you can watch TV, or you can go to the doctor immediately and get some, anti-poison. So it isn't the same. The truth is the truth. It doesn't really matter what you are. The reason, if you are confused, is because of this nonsense that we have bastardized all the concepts, and we put them all in the same place, and we're calling them the same name for all host of reasons, and that creates confusion. And nothing is worse than being confused. There is nothing wrong with religious people choosing to be religious, to have faith in their religion. I admire them, but what I cannot understand is how can a scientist on the one hand be truly a scientist, and on the other hand be religious, because he understands neither. The two are completely different. One relies on rational propagation of the laws of physics and chemistry, and the other one relies on the exact opposite, on obedience, and even obedience in the face of contradictory evidence. So when we are confused, we make mistakes, and out of the mistakes, conflicts happen, and conflicts lead to wars and perpetual tragedy, which is where we are consistently. We're going through this in a non-ending, history of the world. Even today, with all of the abundance of everything we have, we still have to have this. And I think it's mainly because of this. We're confused. And we probably, in many cases, we want to be confused, because that justifies then what we do, because we can talk bullshit and then do the exact opposite. Anyway, that was the short video on what I think true philosophy is, and the fact that everything else is not. So you have to make up your own mind whether you believe me or not. But anyway, if you like a systematic explanation of some of these points, these are subject of book number 4 in the next few videos, and that was Socionomy. I should have really called this book. It's available from Kindle free of charge. I don't want anything from you. It should have been called really For Socionomy, but at the time I thought Democracy, the Great Athenian Blunder would be a more catchy, a more relevant title, and people might want to look at it, but I don't think many people did. But anyway, if you've seen the videos, my concern here is that we need to re-examine what we think we believe and what we think is the truth of things, because like this particular situation where a concept has been totally bastardized, we are very confused, and if we don't examine it, we continue to be confused, and so we just become full of opinions rather than understanding that truths do exist and that we should look for them. And if the establishments are not challenged, I mean, I'm actually overtly challenging these establishments that I consider to be businesses. I believe they don't know anymore what philosophy is, because it's become so alienated. Because how else would you be teaching in the same university Aztec philosophy or Hindu philosophy? Because that's a nonsense. That it does not exist. The word means nothing. Anyway, thanks.